NDP leadership race has started, so let's check in on the party. Because they've kind of already managed to serve up a buffet of stuff for people to be pissed at them for. And some of it is fair. And some, like this freak out over the signature requirements, is not. I'm gonna take you through it all, but let's start with the signature requirement because that is what everyone is freaking out about right now. See, the NDP leadership campaign technically kicked off yesterday, which means that candidates can start working to hit all of the requirements so they can gain support and eventually become Jagmeet Singh's formal successor. These requirements have been publicly known since late July. So the fresh outrage that we're seeing is a direct response to how the National Post decided to frame this story. Go figure. The rules are pretty boilerplate stuff for these kinds of leadership races. Telling prospective members that they have to uphold party values, have to read party policies, have to have actually been a member of the NDP for 30 days at least before running for leadership. And like other party leadership races, there are signature requirements. To be an eligible leadership candidate, you have to get 500 signatures from people who are members of the NDP, which makes sense. If you can't even get signatures from 500 members of the NDP, there's no way you're going to win the leadership race. So why waste everyone's time with a huge slate of candidates who don't stand a chance? But these signatures can't come from just any members of the NDP. Leadership hopefuls need at least 50 signatures from members in each of the following 5 regions: Atlantic Canada, Quebec, Ontario, BC in the north, and the prairies. Once again, this is normal. The Liberal Party had a similar regional signature requirement in their most recent race, and so did the Conservatives. But where the NDP shook things up and earned themselves a National Post headline was they didn't want to just make sure the leadership candidates had diverse regional support. They wanted to make sure that these leadership hopefuls also earned a diversity of support in some other ways, God forbid. So they added these 3 categories. At least 50% of the total required signatures must be from members who do not identify as a cis man. A minimum of 100 signatures must be from members of equity-seeking groups, included but not limited to racialized members, Indigenous members, members of the LGBTQIA2S+ community, and persons living with disabilities. And at least 10% of the total required signatures must come from young New Democrats at the time of signature collection. And when I say they shook things up, it's just relative to the other parties. They actually did this in their last leadership race too, and everything was okay. But here is how the National Post framed this. Quote, "The NDP leadership is underway and the party is limiting signatures from cis men." That is a wild way to word this, but a lot of people took this framing and ran with it. But what do the rules actually tell us? The NDP leadership candidate can get as many cis male signatures as they want, as long as they also manage to get an equal or greater number of signatures from people who aren't that. There's no limit. But if you can't get an equal number of signatures from people who aren't cis men, so women, trans folks, non-binary folks, that is a skill issue and should be a factor in whether the NDP wants you as a leader. Especially when you consider that NDP support is majority women. And there are slightly more women in the Canadian population than there are men. So if you, as a leadership candidate, are getting more than half of your support from cis dudes, you're doing something that is alienating women and gender diverse folks, which is, once again, a skill issue. That is bad. It means you probably won't win the leadership race, but if by some freak series of events you do, it also means you probably won't be a very good leader of this kind of party. That's also why this is clearly a dumb rage bait issue. These requirements are going to be a non-issue, as they were last time, for any potentially successful NDP leadership candidate, and it's a smart way to ensure that your potential leader can appeal to a broad spectrum of Canadians. The only people who are doing identity politics here are the people claiming that asking for you as an NDP leadership candidate not to have a skill issue and attracting support from all demographics is somehow discrimination. It is idiotic, not worth talking about, and those of you who are fixating on this and making it an issue are the ones freaking out about identity and making that the focus. Because, again, no one took issue with this when it was public for weeks. That is, until it was served up on a platter to a right-wing, non-NDP voting audience when the National Post published an article that they put on Twitter's radar. Meanwhile, the actual story that's happening within the NDP is the Reclaim the NDP movement. This is a group of people trying to force the party back to its roots. It's grassroots, to be exact. I'm sorry. They're encouraging federal donors to support their local riding associations so the NDP can, as they put it, quote, earn back public trust by empowering local representation and diverse working class community leadership. So that's going to be actually something to watch, and I'll be keeping my eye on it. Moving on to the thing that actually annoyed me this week. It's a comment that interim NDP leader Don Davies made in a recent podcast interview with journalist Steve Paikin. I'm going to play the clip for you and then we'll break it down.
And I think one of the questions is, have we veered too much from our sort of class-based analysis to identity politics? My own view, this is just me speaking, is that we have. It's not that those intersectional issues aren't important. They are. It's just a question of the right balance. Are we really understanding what working people are going through? And I think you're right. When we're talking about, say, drag reading in libraries or trans women in sports, those issues may have their own, their own impact or import. I don't think we're talking about the real issues that most working people are struggling with. Can they pay their rent? Can they buy a house? Can they buy groceries?
Now, my understanding of what Davies is trying to say is that they focused on these identity issues too much to the detriment of other ones. And to that I say, where? When? What? And even if we do accept that premise, there is no reason why the most viable left party in Canada should back down from these conversations. Because here's the thing. As I just clearly demonstrated with what we spent the first half of this video talking about, the reason we end up talking about all of this identity stuff is generally because the right wing takes umbrage with a small step of progress that hugely helps marginalized folks to have a slightly better life. And that no one is actually having their day-to-day adversely impacted by. In those small steps towards a slightly kinder world, these people see an opportunity. So they blow up whatever that small progressive change is, making it into a massive panic based on imagined threats that aren't actually happening. Like, anyone who has peed in the same bathroom as a trans woman knows it literally changes nothing about the experience whatsoever, but it does make life way less stressful for that trans person who just needs to pee. Letting the handful of trans kids at school participate in a team sport where the other kids have all kinds of advantages and disadvantages, like who hit puberty earlier, or who's had a growth spurt and who hasn't, or whatever else. And when the science is unclear about whether trans girls would even have an advantage at all. That isn't going to be the deciding factor in whether your kid one day competes in the Olympics. But it will make a huge difference for the happiness of those couple of trans kids who just want to play a sport. This is why progressive folks need to hit back and protect these people when these hateful panics erupt, because craven politicians will use those panics, exacerbate them, and spread that hate, in the hopes that voters will focus on how they're going to tackle that issue and ignore the fact that that same party is also probably going to ensure the rich get richer at the expense of the working class. Something that most people would take issue with if they weren't distracted by a hateful, fake panic. This is where people like Don screw up though, because they recognize that that panic is fake, but fail to recognize that the impact of that panic is real. And that real impact means that marginalized folks do need help and support. Because even if the issue that's manufactured is a fake one, the hate and discriminatory policies that right-wing politicians will exacerbate and enact to gain political advantage are real. The grifters who are driving this panic for attention and financial gain do create real hate that drives actual real-life harassment. That does require our attention, even if we'd rather be talking about something else. Because trust me, no one wants to talk about something else more than trans folks who just want to live their lives without dealing with these kinds of attacks. So yeah, that's where things stand with the NDP right now. I'll be keeping you posted as this leadership campaign continues and candidates start to come out of the woodwork. Until then, what do you think of all this?